Hey guys, welcome back. Joe Brunsman, insurance broker to the stars. Today I'm talking about post cyber event reimbursements, how to win the game. How do you maximize the probability that the extra expenses incurred by the business because their MSP has to do extra work following some type of cyber event, that the insurance company picks up the bill? Now, I think ultimately this is a win-win for everybody. It's fewer out-of-pocket expenses. They've already paid their deductible. Now they got a big bill from the MSP to do all this additional work because it's out of scope. How do we maximize the probability that the insurance company picks that up, which in turn maximizes the probability that the MSP gets paid for the work they do without putting an additional monetary burden on a client who's already stressed out because they're dealing with a cyber event? So let's go ahead and jump on into it. Before we do, we are big time here. We are sponsored by Ciardi and Aston, lawyers for the situation, and Aston Ferraro International Strategic Advisors. I'm sure you guys have seen Danny Aston on here spewing all types of wonderful, great knowledge to the MSP community, volunteering his time to help you guys out. So please check him out if you need assistance. All right, now what's the problem that we're looking at here? What's the foundation? Well, beyond the fact that in the last couple months, I've gotten, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 questions about this. So I thought it'd be a good video to make to help out the MSP community and anybody that has a cyber insurance policy trying to figure this issue out. But ultimately, hey, if you're an MSP, your client has ostensibly hired you to safeguard and operate to a certain degree their computer systems. Now, let's imagine a cyber event has impacted your client. So your MSP goes, all right, well, to deal with this, it's out of scope. Here's all these additional things that we're recommending that you sign off on, Mr. Client, to best protect your businesses. How can you best assist them so that you're more likely to get paid for their services because their cyber insurance policy is going to agree with what you are doing? That results in less friction. I think that lowers the probability of liability, makes everybody happier. It makes the situation smoother. That means recovery happens faster. You kind of see this domino effect where it just seems to make everything better down the line. Ultimately, you want it to be where, hey, the MSP and the client, you guys are fighting the same fight. You're trying to get the system back up and operating. Here are the things we got to do. How do we facilitate that process in the least painful way? Now, there's some tips and tricks here that I think a lot of people are just unaware of. Well, because you're not insurance folks like I am and you don't nerd out on this stuff. But if you've been through a cyber event, you've had clients go through a cyber event, or you've never been through a cyber event, there's tips and tricks here I think you guys should remember, write down, go back, refine those processes so you're most likely to not have those additional out-of-pocket expenses. So let's get nerdy for one sec, all right? Bear with me because I do love insurance. My wife thinks I'm a nerd, but hey, such is life. All of this boils down to the insured's duty to mitigate damages, okay? It's all about the duty to mitigate damages. It's well established in common law. You're going to see it in the insurance case law all the time. Let me give you an example. So let's imagine your kitchen faucet just starts spewing water all over the place. And, maybe it's going all over or it's faster than your drain can actually handle that outflow of water. What do you do? Should you just turn off the water to the house as quickly as possible, start trying to dry things off, and then you call your insurance company and say, hey, it soaked my floor. I was able to get all this other stuff out of there, but hey, I got damage to my floor. Do you just leave it be? You let the water spew out everywhere because you're like, hey, I got insurance for this. Well, that's probably not going to work out well for you. Or 3, do you just bring all your valuables into the kitchen because you go, hey, I want all new stuff. So, hey, bring in the TV, bring in the toaster, bring in the stereo system, let it all get drenched. Let me get that sweet, sweet insurance money. Well, that's probably some element of fraud or destruction there. And the insurance company is going to be very angry at you because you had a duty to mitigate damages, not increase damages. So I think the best option there is, hey, to the best of your ability, you turn off the water to the house as quickly as possible, clean up whatever you can, and then if you have damages, you call the insurance company, all right? Because they are going to assess that when it comes to property claims, so be ready. Now, how does this actually apply to cyber insurance? I gave you an example dealing with a kitchen faucet, but when it comes to cyber insurance, there's actually 3 places where you're going to see this duty to mitigate damages ultimately come into play. Now, first, you're going to see this before the event. The insurance company is trying to figure out, okay, what type of organization is this? And that's reflected in the premiums that you're ultimately going to be charged based upon, hey, the cybersecurity controls that the organization has or does not have. So pre-event, you're going to see this assessed via the application, or you're going to see it mandated actually within the policy. They're going to mandate this duty to mitigate through something like a critical vulnerability exclusion, where they will say, hey, you only have so much time after this patch comes out for this very serious issue to implement that patch. If you're not willing to mitigate the probability of some critical vulnerability being exploited, well, we're just not going to insure your company in that event. All right, so pre-event, you're going to see it. Post-event, containing those damages post-event, you'll see that with, hey, the written notice of circumstance, so potential claims. You're going to see that in claims notice provisions as well. And then in the actual claim evaluation, which kind of ties in with number 2, you're going to see the insurer's incident response review. And they're going to say, hey, what did you do following this event? All right. If on a Friday, you saw that your entire system was being encrypted and you did literally nothing about it, and we can see it in the logs, and then you just let it lie and it encrypted your entire system when you could have shut everything down and contained that damage. But instead, you just waited till Monday, had a bender of a weekend, came back in, you're like, all right, well, insurance is going to take care of it. Insurance companies are not going to appreciate that, all right? So now you could be dealing with partial, you could be dealing with no coverage, all based upon the failure to mitigate. That's why having an incident response plan is actually really important as a side note. So let's look at an example. The best place to look to start without doing a full analysis of a cyber policy is going into the extra expenses. Now, you're going to see this as a common term on many policies, a provision within there. And you're going to see some key words. So it means reasonable and necessary costs and expenses incurred or paid by an insured. So this is, hey, bill for that MSP. Reduce the period of restoration. Mitigate or reduce expenses resulting from the system disruption. Right? Secure the computer system so that a similar system disruption is avoided. So you see, reduce, mitigate, reduce, avoided. Next example here. Now I know it's a wall of text, bear with me here. But once again, you're going to see reasonable and necessary expenses incurred by an insured to minimize or avoid business income loss, etc. Why is this important? Because there's business interruption reimbursement within a cyber policy. The faster you get somebody back up online within the bounds of playing by the game of reporting a cyber event, the less ultimate money the cyber insurer has to pay out, so it's good for them. And because everybody knows in the insurance world that whoever holds that policy has a duty to mitigate damages to the best of their ability, they know this is how the game is played. Now, you're going to see here in red a little bit further down. I wanted to break this out for you. Extra expenses does not include, it talks about updating, restoring, replacing, or improving a computer system beyond that which existed just before the event. Okay, so you can't just make things better when the attorney sits down and he's looking through, or the claims guy is looking through the quote provided by the MSP. If it's to make something better than it was before, that's not the purpose of insurance, right? It's just supposed to make you whole, not better. You're just supposed to get back to the level you were before the event occurred. So if there is some issue where you're like, hey, we had this legacy software, and because of that, that's how the bad guy got in, the cost to update the software is very unlikely to be covered. And you'll see that number 2, expenses incurred to identify or remediate software program errors or vulnerabilities, right? Because that goes back to, hey, you had this previous duty to try and mitigate that. You didn't do it. We're not going to pay for your screw up to begin with. All right. But once again, you'll see minimize, avoid, reduce, mitigate, avoid. Keywords you got to keep in mind. So here are some caveats for you. Generally, there has to be a nexus between the services you rendered and avoiding, minimizing, reducing downtime. So keep those words in mind. It's going to be important. Improvements typically don't count. And remember, the MSP is not a full-blown incident response team. So there's going to be some things that it's going to be the forensics guys. It's going to be the attorneys. All right. And that's fine, but you still have a role to play ultimately. Next, not everything is insurable. All right. It's just impossible to make everything insurable. So there might still be some light items where you're like, hey, client, you really need to do this. It may not fall within the bounds of what your insurance company is going to reimburse you for, but I still think it's a really good idea because of X, Y, and Z. All right. Next, don't make any promises. I'm giving you guys the 30,000 foot view, the tips and tricks on how to best position yourself. I'm not doing a full-blown policy analysis because every policy is going to be different. Fair enough? All right. So what are some of those easy wins? When you guys are putting that, post cyber event or incident response quote together, think of, discovery, identification, containment, or use NIST, detect, respond, recover. You got to break these things up. If you just have a laundry list, I saw this a couple months ago where the MSP just comes back with this effectively to a layperson, an incomprehensible laundry list of things to do, and it wasn't broken down into bite-sized elements. So think about giving this to an attorney with no technology background. Caveat, they're getting better, but still giving it to that person so that they can rationalize whether that expense is legitimate to avoid, minimize, etc., or if it's just psychobabble on a page. All right, that'll get you in trouble. So remember, I talked before about some, kind of the steps post-cyber event, which is identify, contain, refrain, remembering that you are not an attorney or a forensic specialist. All right. Also, as you are part of this process, a really easy win is just keep track of, hey, what are the forensics? What do the legal guys need us to do? Okay, well, you know what? Make sure that you're charging appropriately for that. And then in the quote that you have, or the bill that you ultimately give to the client, you say, hey, the forensics team told us we need to do X, Y, Z. Here was the cost for that, right? And the reason we did that was to avoid, minimize, mitigate, essentially additional downtime. Now, whenever you're formulating these, speak English to a layperson. All right. So imagine you are talking to, let's just say, another client who is not technologically minded. And you go, we need to do on this quote, we are proposing that we do X, Y, Z for the purposes of mitigation for blah, blah, blah. Or, hey, we needed to do this to minimize the downtime to your business. All right. Just add an explanation for why you're doing what you're doing, or add an explanation for what the proposed scope of work is. That's going to make everything easier. It makes my job easier. When I'm talking to the claims guy or the attorney, it makes your clients easier. Their life's easier when they're talking to the same folks. It's going to make your time easier at the end of the day if you get called onto the carpet to legitimize what these things actually are. All right. So as a bonus, when your client has a cyber event, if you really want to dig into it, once again, don't give legal or insurance advice, but a quick control F on that PDF and you can look for extra expenses, the word mitigate. You're going to find this in other places, but generally that extra expense clause will give you a really good idea of what that exact insurance policy and that particular insurance company is looking for things that you could potentially be reimbursed for as an MSP. And once again, never make promises of reimbursement, okay? So at the end of the day, you have to remember, I can give you all the tips and tricks. These are things that I tell my clients, all right? However, it's always up ultimately to the attorney and the claims guy, right? You'll see where it's reasonable and necessary expenses. Well, the term reasonable, that's a legal word, or it's a legal term, I should say. There's always going to be a little interpretation here. So never promise that, hey, these things are going to be reimbursed by your cyber insurance company. So, hey, client, here you go. Tell your cyber insurer they need to pay for this. You don't want to start playing that game because that could get nasty real fast. So, hey, just do the best you can to position that quote, speaking in plain English, speak the words of the insurance company and the insurance policy so that, hey, your client gets paid, you get reimbursed for the work that you've done or that you're going to do. Everybody's happy, lowers the temperature in the room, lowers the possibility of liability. All right, with that, hopefully you enjoyed this. Like, share, comment, subscribe if you learned from this today. Please share my video. It helps the word get out and helps the MSP community at large. Right above me, I'm going to put considerations after a client's cyber event that I spoke about before. And if you click over there on my face, you can subscribe to my channel. All right, guys, with that, stay safe.